Hey, I'm Pat. Welcome to Daily Devo. Today we're going to talk about being happy about suffering. We're in the midst of looking at the longest recorded message Jesus gave, something we call the Sermon on the Mount, because Jesus gave it to a large crowd sitting on a hillside overlooking the Sea of Galilee. So I want you to imagine that you're there. You're one of them sitting in this large crowd in the natural amphitheater listening to Jesus. Behind him, you can see the Sea of Galilee, and a little to your left are the hillsides that we now call the Golan Heights. You've been listening to Jesus speak about this list of attitudes or behaviors that we should exhibit as his followers, but something happens now. Imagine that in this moment, Jesus quits scanning the crowd and focuses completely on you as he says these next words. He moves from doing this to doing this. And then you hear him say, God blesses you when people mock you and persecute you and lie about you and say all sorts of evil things against you because you are my followers. Be happy about it. Be very glad, for great reward awaits you in heaven. And remember, the ancient prophets were persecuted in the same way. First, let's not miss a little phrase Jesus throws in there, because you are my followers, or because of me. You see, unfortunately, I've heard too many people whine and complain about the suffering or their suffering as if they're being persecuted, when in reality their suffering is a result of their stupid, foolish decisions. I'm so glad I've never been one of them, to whine and complain about having to deal with the consequences of my own foolish decisions. Hopefully you hear my dripping sarcasm. But in this case, the mocking and lies and persecution Jesus is telling us to rejoice over, yes, he is telling us to rejoice over it, is specifically a result of living like Jesus. Just so we don't miss it, let me read verse 12 again. Be happy about it. Be very glad, for a great reward awaits you in heaven. And remember, the ancient prophets were persecuted in the same way. What? Why in the world would Jesus tell us to be happy, to be very glad that we're being lied about, mocked, made fun of, or even physically abused? Because of our choice to live like Jesus? Why? What's to be happy about? Well, Jesus answers the question. Because he says a great reward awaits you in heaven, and because you are being treated the same way followers of God have been treated in the past. What is this great reward he's speaking about? He doesn't tell us specifically, but if we were to read the book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible, where John was given a glimpse of the future, you would clearly see that martyrs and those who suffer for Jesus are given special honor. Now, if you live in the U.S., you may be thinking that this whole thing is a little outdated. For most of us, we've felt very little persecution for our faith. Perhaps we've been laughed at for needing a religious crutch or mocked for being ignorant and simple-minded. But few of us have faced much persecution beyond this. Two things. Number one, when we look at this from a global perspective, it is not at all outdated. At this very moment, many of our brothers and sisters in Christ are facing intense persecution around the world. Number two, you and I may not be facing persecution now, but it could happen at any time. I think because most of us listening don't face this persecution on a daily basis, we get a little surprised when it does happen. Peter, one of Jesus' closest followers, will later write a few letters to Christians. We have it in our Bibles, and we call it 1st and 2nd Peter. And in one of these letters, Peter speaks about persecution. Let me sum up what he says with this. When you live as Jesus did, don't be surprised when you're treated like Jesus was. And when you're treated like Jesus was, rejoice, because God in heaven will in some way honor you and compensate you far more than whatever that persecution cost you.